I don't really know how I'm going to follow that. Geordie's like the most adorable man in the world. It's absolutely terrifying. I also feel a bit scared of the own depiction of me, because she's wearing heels, and I never really wear heels, so I feel like she's looking down at me, and she's cooler than I am, so it's kind of scary. Yeah, just to tell you a bit about myself to begin with. So I edit SHOWStudio, as you heard, which is a fashion platform which was founded by Nick Knight, the British photographer, who I'm sure you all know because you're creative people. You can tell I'm really great at making presentations because didn't have any better ideas other than just SHOWStudio. But just to tell you a bit about me, so I am a fashion journalist, that's how I define myself, but I both write and I broadcast, and that's something that's great about working at SHOWStudio is you get to do both of those things. I don't particularly come from a fashion background. I studied history at university, and then I did go to St. Martin's, but I got my job at SHOWStudio kind of a term in, and it really suits me that I had that background, because SHOWStudio is very academic, it's quite research-based, and we approach things kind of, I think the way I see it is we put fashion in a broader cultural conscious. So I think that's why it works well for me. I don't know how well you know the site, so there it is. We're actually redesigning because the site design is a little bit hard to use. Sorry if any of you have ever tried to get on it and navigate your way through it. Just to tell you a bit about SHOWStudio, so it was founded in the year 2000 by Nick Knight. It sounds kind of obvious now to have fashion on the internet, but when it was founded, it really was quite pioneering and quite revolutionary. A lot of people weren't engaging with the internet at all, and it's actually quite funny to look back at SHOWStudio's kind of early days. It's quite sweet. Now we live stream like hour-long interviews, and they kind of tried to do that back then, but it would be like one image a minute going out on a webcam and stuff. It's quite fabulous. And the site was kind of founded for two reasons. Again, I don't want to speak on Nick's behalf, but this is how I see it. I think one of them was about opening up the process of fashion. You know, Nick tells this amazing story about shooting these amazing pictures that I'm sure you've all seen for magazines like British Vogue, big advertising clients. And he was on a shoot, and Naomi Campbell was, she was modeling, and she was listening to a song on her, her Discman or whatever they were called at the time, pre-iPod. She had it in her ears, and she was like dancing around. And he looked at her, and he kind of looked at the shoot, and there were about 6 people in the room, like the makeup artist, the stylist, whoever. And he was like, this is amazing. People would love to see this, and not just see Naomi kind of being fabulous, but also see the process of making a fashion image. So it got him kind of thinking about giving people access. We would never say that it's about demystifying fashion. It's more that we believe like all aspects of the creative process are really interesting. So if you come to SHOWStudio, you can watch a Nick Knight photo shoot, and you can see designers making their clothes and all different kinds of things. So that was one angle of it, which I think is really interesting, and it's a really valid thing, because fashion is all about polished image, and it's all about kind of creating this veneer, but actually often it is in the process that you find the most interesting things. And I think that's particularly important when understanding Nick Knight's work as well, because he loves making mistakes, and a lot of his best work, I think, has come out of things where they've potentially gone wrong in a photograph, and I think letting people see that and kind of revel in that and understand that is really important. So that was one of the reasons that SHOWStudio came about. Another was to support the medium of fashion film, which is a medium which is still in its infancy. You know, fashion photography had such a long time to kind of develop and grow. Fashion film less so, and there are some really, really bad fashion films out there that I'm sure you've all seen. It's like a girl walking through a car park, leaning against a wall. You know, it's just so bad. And I think it's given the medium a bit of a bad name, but Nick really firmly believes in it. And I do as well. You think fashion is made to be seen in movement, and clothing, it is about fabrication, and when you see those clothes move on a runway, it's fantastic. And it is strange that we still kind of fetishize the still image, and there's so much that you can do with fashion film. So that was kind of another reason that it began, and it was a platform for him to explore that. And it was also a platform for him to kind of work with his archive. An interesting thing about Nick is he obsessively kind of chronicles everything he does, not in a weird ego way. He doesn't sit around watching it, but he films every shoot that he does. And he's done that since the kind of late to mid-80s. And it started just with a webcam. He'd just kind of say to everyone in the room, hey guys, do you mind if I just film the shoot? And he keeps it all for his archive. And that's kind of turned into SHOWStudio. Most of his shoots now you can kind of find on the site. But some of the really early ones, there is footage of. And we actually play with that sometimes. I don't know if any of you guys saw, we did a series recently called Unseen McQueen to time with the Savage Beauty exhibition, where we actually found footage of all these early shoots. And it was kind of chaotic, because went and sat down with Nick, and I was like, I really think we should do this. Like, everyone's talking about Lee's life and him as a man, but let's just do something really authentic about the work you produced together. I was like, what have you got? And he just literally couldn't remember. So we had to kind of go through, and his amazing team at SHOWStudio were going through trying to look at all these amazing shoots, and it is really amazing to have that on archive. So yeah, that's SHOWStudio. I thought I would show you a little intro video. We've cropped it. I couldn't work out how to edit it nicely, so it does kind of stop really abruptly, very techy. But it gives you kind of an indication of the kind of work that we do at SHOWStudio, and it's a mix together of different films.
From our level, and she doesn't try, pouting and things. Just because she looks so different in each picture.
When a fashion designer creates a garment, he or she always creates that garment to be seen in movement.
For me, always the show is about like storytelling.
Okay, so you saw a few things there. The first one was a film of Kate Moss. It was actually the second fashion film Nick ever made. You could see the timestamp, it was 1995. And again, we only put that up about a year ago, so this is what I mean with how we go through his archive and find stuff and pull it out. You also saw some clips from some interviews. So that was J.W. Anderson who, being interviewed for a series we have called In Fashion, which I'm going to talk to you about later. And there was also the guy who was kind of painting the model. That was Alexander McQueen. And he'd come into the studio and he'd turned a bridegroom into a bride in it's literally like 3 minutes of footage, and it's absolutely incredible. And it's all about, celebrating the creative process and streaming things out of SHOWStudio. That was us in the studio. Model turns up, he's dressed in, it's before my time, but he's dressed in this amazing suit, and Lee kind of with sheer imagination cuts it up, throws paint and turns it into a bride. So it's all about showing people kind of the possibilities of creativity. Just to tell you a bit about kind of actually what the studio is like. So this is some lovely images of Nick at his desk in the studio. We're a really, really small team. I think it's like 11 of us in total. And we kind of are our own beast within fashion. Like, someone wrote an article about us recently and they called us the Switzerland of fashion, which I thought was quite sweet. It's this idea of us being quite neutral, and we rely a lot on collaborators. When we started, people used to pit us quite a lot against things like Dazed, and they would talk about us as kind of being a competitor, which I think was kind of valid at the time. But as time's moved on, we've kind of become more of an institution than a publication. Like, we don't do fashion news, and I think that's a big part of why we've kind of managed to maintain this quite neutral space, and we rely a lot on people coming in for panel discussions or submitting articles or essays, and we haven't really got caught up in that kind of rat race of online fashion publishing, which I think a lot of sites have done, and some do it brilliantly. And it's an interesting space to be in, because it's made me think very differently about online publishing. I find it really interesting. I lecture sometimes at LCF or St. Martin's, and whenever you speak to the students, the really, really, really like nerdy, smart ones who love research, they're like, oh, I really want to work in print. And you're always like, okay, why? And they're like, because I want to do something really clever, and I don't want to do something that's kind of really mainstream. And I realized everyone approaches the internet like mass is best. The more people that see it, the better it is. And it's utterly bizarre. It's not something that translates to magazines. Like, people revel in magazines being niche and specific and only appealing to a certain kind of person. But even with the most kind of creative outlets, this idea has prevailed that, you can bung anything up online, or it doesn't have to be quite as good, or it should be shorter and it should be snappier. And we've never really gone with that at SHOWStudio. Kind of quite amusingly, like, our videos are like an hour and a half long. Like, we stream, shoots which are 4 days long. We once literally streamed paint drying on a Nick shoot when we were like changing the set over. So it really isn't kind of like clickbaity content. But it's made me think a lot about the possibilities of online to do something niche, and that actually it doesn't particularly matter if you're not getting a million hits. Doesn't make it good. If it's not good, it's not good. And I think that's something that I find interesting with young people, is they are stuck in that mentality that the more people that see it, the better it is. And that's, SHOWStudio has really changed my mentality with that. I wanted to talk to you a bit more about fashion film, which is obviously the medium that I said that SHOWStudio is all about supporting. This is a clip from one of Nick's really early films. It's called Dynamic Blooms, and it's one of my favourite fashion films, and I think what's best about it is it just kind of makes such a valid case for the medium. Like, as I said, I'm sure you've all seen really terrible fashion films, and it just seems like a really kind of sometimes not the best medium, but here you see why clothing should be shown in movement. I've just done a little clip from it, but yeah, it's called Dynamic Blooms. So yes, it's quite a nice example of something that you could just never really do with a flat image. And fashion film is really growing, and we've been supporting it for years, and I think it's going to get to a point where hopefully it will become much more creative and much less kind of stuck in the infancy that it's in. And that's quite a kind of classical piece for Nick, and I think, I don't know, some of you who are particularly interested in photography, there's a strange thing, I kind of see two sides to Nick's work, because he loves things which are kind of almost a little bit, for want of a better phrase, kind of almost a bit old-fashioned. He loves shooting flowers, and there is this side to him that's very romantic. And then there's also this side to him that absolutely adores new technology. That opening film I showed you, the really pixelated piece, I wanted to leave that in there because that's one of his first sort of explorations of 3D scanning. And it's from 2002, so it did look really pixelated and a bit awkward, but he's really, absolutely loves new technology. He shoots a lot on his iPhone, big campaigns and editorials for magazines. He quite likes being able to sort of put himself in the picture, and a camera, I think it just gives you that ability to not be separated from your subject. But this focus on technology really underpins what we do at SHOWStudio, and a lot of our team is tech. That's kind of why the team is quite small from an editorial point of view. We work a lot with things like 3D scanning, but also very into things like animation and just trying things out. And the next film I'm going to show you was a piece called As If, which was about exploring the language of the internet. And it was made a lot using 3D. And it's another Nick Knight film, but it's completely different to what you just saw. And I hope gives you a sense of kind of, I guess, the scope of fashion film as a medium.
8.
So yeah, very different approach, but I think it's interesting to kind of play around with different ways of making films and not just using kind of, cameras using different forms, and also using found imagery, which is something that kind of underpinned that project. It's really hard to condense SHOWStudio into a very small amount of time, but just to run through this is Faustine Steinsman. She came into the studio. She's a fashion designer, very talented. She came into the studio and made a piece over 3 days, live on camera. That's something we do a lot. We invite designers in to take up kind of a residency in SHOWStudio. So they'll make their studio within our studio, the same studio that we stream Nick's shoots from, or we stream our interviews from. So it really is quite a special sort of space. And they'll set up their studios and make something across however long it takes. That can be one day, it can be a week. And we'll stream that entire process. They'll talk about their practice while they're there. Some amazing people have done it. Gareth Pugh, Mary Katranzu, Stephen Jones. And again, it's about opening up the process of fashion. She works with amazing weaving techniques, and actually to have her talk about them is really special. And then the next one is Nick, one of his shoots. So this is where we shot Cara Delevingne for an editorial for Garage Magazine. And again, we'll stream the whole shoot. This kind of leads me to the next thing which I was going to talk about, which is kind of my role at SHOWStudio as editor, because it feels like I'm kind of fangirling Nick a bit and talking about everything he does. But I have some stuff I do there as well. So as editor, I work really closely with Nick. He is really involved. He's there every day, which I think surprises a lot of people. It's, by no means kind of like a vanity project that he pushes on to other people. He's obviously very visual, and I do think SHOWStudio is a visual platform. Obviously, I love words, but I don't think there'd be any point me trying to say that people come to read my articles more than to see his films or anything like that. But I think it's about balancing the two. And Nick and I work quite closely together on coming up with concepts for projects. We do a lot of rolling series, which some of you guys might have seen. We did a really good one recently called Girly. and it'll have something like, it'll have a film, but it'll also have lots of essays, we'll reproduce academic writing, we'll do interviews. And that was inspired by a lot of that kind of hyper-feminine aesthetic that you see with designers like Medium Kirchhoff or Ryan Lowe. So often I'll kind of be musing on a subject and I'll wander into Nick's office and I'll be like, oh, I was thinking about this, what are you thinking? And these projects come around quite collaboratively. Another big part of my role is interviewing people. I do a lot of broadcasting on the site as well as writing. Which means I actually don't really like doing stuff like this, because when you get used to talking to a camera, you can make really bad jokes and just pretend that there's someone there laughing, but when there's like actually a room full of people looking at you, you're like, oh God, I'm deeply unfunny. But it's okay, I've got used to it. So this is, we do a lot of different interviews on SHOWStudio. We stream a lot of panel discussions, we film a lot of talks happening at different institutions. I thought, kind of for the sake of timing, I'd condense it to this series, which is probably my favourite interview series that we have on the site. It's called In Fashion, and it is such a special interview series. If you guys haven't seen it, please check it out, and it's incredibly addictive. It focuses on kind of profiling people from all across fashion. It started when Penny Martin, who's now the brilliant editor of The Gentlewoman, was at SHOWStudio, and the first interview we ever did was Tim Walker, and very sensibly, I forgot to look up what date it was. I think it was either 2007 or 2009. So it's a really old series on SHOWStudio. It's live-streamed interviews. The interviews are about an hour long, and they're with people from all across fashion. So not just designers. You know, fashion kind of fetishizes interviewing designers, but it's people you can see there's Glenn Luchford, who's an image maker, Peter Saville, graphic designer. You know, we've done makeup artists, we've done some amazing people in it, you know, Professor Louise Wilson, amazing journalists, Tim Blanks, Dylan Jones, Alexander Schulman, all different people. And it kind of is, I love it because it's so not online friendly at all. You know, interviews online, they're like sound bites and they're really snappy and you get like the best quotes, whereas this is like, I mean, it's kind of laughably unsuited to online. Like it's an hour long, these interviews. Peter Saville's was actually an hour and 45 minutes. He has a lot to say. But I love that. I love that we respect our viewers enough to think that they will sit and watch an hour's interview. I mean, I hope they do. I'm sure a lot more people would probably look at it if we condensed it down to like a snappy little 2-minute film, but it's not what we're about. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the series, because a lot of people ask about it. When it goes out live, it looks like this. I don't know if any of you have seen that. That's Olivia Roosting, who's the designer at Balmain. It's an amazing setup as an interview. Nick envisaged it as kind of like a moving portrait, and it's inspired by Irving Penn portraiture, which I'll kind of come to a bit later. And I think one important thing, the reason I wanted to talk about it is I think interviews, people don't prioritize them visually at all. You know, if someone was going to take a portrait of someone really interesting for a magazine, they would expect it to be, you know, at the highest visual level. They'd be looking at the camera, they'd be looking fantastic, really considered. Interviews, that just doesn't happen. You know, people are always kind of like looking slightly over the camera, it's rushed setup. And we wanted to do something that was kind of as visually inquisitive as it was kind of inquisitive as an interview. Don't make life easy for ourselves. So when it goes out live, we're sat, it's kind of like blind date, like I'm sat here and they're sat next to me, and we're talking to each other through a two-way mirror, and behind the two-way mirror, there's a camera, which sounds kind of pointless and poncy, and it does look a bit weird when it goes out live. But what we do is we eventually edit these footage down into like these little 15-minute films, which look like this. And you can see the person, you can see it with Jeremy Scott, they talk directly to the camera, because what they were seeing when they were being interviewed they weren't looking at me, they weren't kind of distracted by me being there, but they were looking at my face kind of in a mirror. And my face was directly in front of a camera. So it means you get someone talking incredibly intimately to a camera, which you just can't get. You can't force that. And it's really, really beautiful. And you can see, going back to what I said about Irving Penn, you also get a sense of the person, like with J.W. Anderson, the way he moves his feet. So I'll be edited out of that final video. You'll hear my voice, and while I'm asking questions, you'll get a sense of the person. So it's trying to treat the interview as much as kind of something with someone giving a chance to talk, it's showing them off visually and trying to understand who they are as a person, you know, through the way they move and the way that they kind of conduct themselves. And I think it is a very revealing interview series. It's kind of a joke I have that whenever we finish them, people always say it's like therapy, and it's also a joke that like people always cry after them, which I start to find really weird because I'm not very good with like real emotion, so I always kind of have to go and like pat them afterwards. But it is quite kind of like I mean, talking about yourself for an hour is quite intimate thing to do, and it's a really lovely interview series. I take it's such a privilege doing it because you really ask people about their entire life, and it really is about how they came to be a creative person, you know, where they grew up, and people have said some really, really revealing stuff, and I think it's made me think a lot about interviewing as a practice, and I'm not actually remotely versed in like interview theory. I don't even know if that's a thing, but it has made me consider interviews a lot and think about them and think about what I think makes a good interview. And I think the big thing, and it sounds really, I guess it sounds really obvious, it is research. And I realized, you know, we see so many interviews with people all the time, and a lot of the people we put in this series, you know, someone like Alexander Schulman or Paul Smith or whoever, you've seen them interviewed a million times. So it's how do you make it something kind of special? And I think the thing is just knowing everything they've said before, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but I try and do that when I interview someone. I try and read like any interview I can get my hands on, because I think what makes a great interview is when you get something new. It's that point where someone says something and you know they haven't said it before, because obviously someone like Paul Smith, when you ask him about like how he got into fashion, he'll repeat the same story because it is the valid story. So it's that point where you ask them something that is perhaps a little bit sensitive or that someone hasn't asked them, that you get something great. And it's not as simplistic as a bad interview, you don't get something new, a good interview you do, but I love that moment when someone's speaking to you and it's intimate and they say something and you're aware that they haven't shared that before. And I love that this series is you know, the fact it's so long, the fact it's an hour long, you can actually ask people things that they perhaps don't know the answer to, and they kind of muse on it, and it's quite a collaborative process where they'll say, oh, I haven't thought about this before. I think I'm quite a pushy interviewer, not in the sense of trying to trip people up, but in the sense of I don't like that culture of fashion where it's fawning and where, you know, people just take these great sound bites and write a great article about someone. I like that sense of people actually being honest, and it's difficult. You have to balance that sensibly. You know, when I don't get any pleasure tripping up a visual person because you're interviewing them, you're asking them to present themselves in a way that they don't choose to. You know, they choose to kind of produce work or make things, and you're asking them to speak about themselves. So it's very different to interviewing a journalist where you can kind of be as rude as you like because it's their trade. But I think it's important to push people and to ask them questions. I've brought a funny example of where I maybe pushed a little too far, which was when I interviewed Jefferson Hack, who is amazing, and it was a real privilege to interview him. But Jefferson's someone he's really polished. You know, if you see interviews with Jefferson, he really is an incredibly smart guy, and he really knows how to present himself, and he always just comes across like really, really great and incredibly controlled. So I was surprised actually that he agreed to do the series, because it was, as I said, like this live long hour, like you can't really hide behind anything. But he came and he was great, and but I felt like there were things that perhaps he's never been asked, and this was one of them. This is from the 15-minute edit of it, but you can kind of see where my probing steps over into just being a bit of a disaster.
This is going to embarrass you, I think, but people often talk about you when stuff's written about you. It's a phrase I kept coming across when I was researching you. People be like, oh, he's the coolest man in Britain. Do you think you're cool?
Go and fuck yourself.
So yeah, that didn't go so well for me. We laughed about it afterwards. Long afterwards. But that's what I mean, like, I was scared to do that. It's really scary to sit opposite someone like that, you know, and be like, do you think you're cool? But it was a question I wanted to ask him, and that's what I mean with kind of the possibilities of the internet and the possibilities of long-form video. There's just this kind of emotion that you can't get from like a short film or from print. And I love writing print interviews. It's a huge part of what I do, but it is just not the same. There's such this amazing sense of timing that you get when you're sat with someone for an hour, and the crescendos and the moments of reflection and the moments of humor. And I think it's such a precious medium, and it's not something that a lot of other people do, and I wish people did more. So yeah, not to just sound like I'm plugging SHOWStudio, but please go and watch them because they are fantastic. I thought, other than my pearls of do lots of research and be rude to Jefferson Hack, I don't really have any other kind of great advice to share. I think the big thing is just that sense of trying to get something new. I think the best journalism is always getting something out of someone that you never had before, and that can be one quote, or that can be getting told to go fuck yourself. It can be whatever, but it's trying to get a real sense of the person, and I think that's something that's missing. A lot of interviews just try and recreate illusions of people that person has already chosen to create, and I hope that I'll never do that. I thought I'd leave you, as we are a visual site, with some visuals. Gets me off the hook with having to think of like a punchy ending. So this is just another clip from the video I showed you at the start, which is a kind of like best of Best of SHOWStudio with some of the great fashion films that we've made. So enjoy.
What I love about fashion is, particularly now and in the last, 10 years, is the breadth of it. So you can do an androgynous boy story and you can do the most crazy, gorgeous, feminine couture story. What I would hope is that in a way it could be a weakness as well, is that I don't have a particular style, that I love everything. And I think that's important for people, to embrace everything.
Thanks, guys.
Hmm.